We are reducing the role and number of weapons in our arsenal while maintaining a safe, secure, and effective deterrent to protect our nation, allies, and partners.
Well, there's Secretary Clinton, along with any number of other officials who were announcing a fundamental change in U.S. nuclear policy today. Now, the interesting thing about this was that, well, there are all sorts of interesting things about it. I mean, one wire story summarized the new policy as, under the new plan, the U.S. promises not to use nuclear weapons against countries that don't have them. I didn't know that was our policy to begin with, but nevertheless, for decades, the U.S. has kept open the possibility of using nuclear weapons under various circumstances against the old Soviet Union in particular, if it were necessary. Now President Obama says he is changing that by narrowing the circumstances and the number of countries who might be threatened. Charles, what does this mean in practice, and why now?
Well, let me tell you the one scenario they brought up explicitly, and that is if the United States is attacked by a country with biologic or chemical weapons. Under the old policy of every administration for decades, our response is we're going to obliterate that country with a nuclear response. That's been the Clinton policy, the Reagan policy, everybody. And now we have a new policy that if that occurs, before we would retaliate in that way, the White House lawyers would ascertain if that country is in compliance with the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And if it is, if it's kept up with its IAEA inspections, it gets immunity from a massive nuclear retaliation. It gets instead, I suppose, a retaliation with TNT and Marines shooting guns. Now, this, to me, is either insane or ridiculous. I can't decide. I report, you decide. It's ridiculous even in the moral sense. Our assumption of this scenario is that the greatest war crime in history is committed, let's say, in Boston, and we're going to look to see if the country is in compliance with IAEA regulations in determining if it's immunized from a nuclear retaliation or not. Secondly, and probably more importantly, is the idea that we are not going to use nukes in defending an ally or in deterring an attack on an ally with conventional weapons. We kept the peace in Europe for 50 years, where the Soviets had a huge advantage in tanks and could have occupied Western Europe overnight. Because from Kennedy on, we had a policy of extended deterrence. You attack with tanks, we retaliate, and Moscow disappears. Is it a credible threat? Who knows? But the Russians had to worry about it. It was our policy from Kennedy on up until Obama, and now it disappears. If you're an ally, what are you going to think about America as your defender and America as a deterror of an attack on you?